started.
It started. All right.
It has started now.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being at our Missoula Community Advisory Group meeting today, November 3rd. I think this is our 7th meeting so far, and we're following pretty close on the heels of our previous meeting, which was last Friday. And so we're gonna primarily pick up where we left off from that meeting and continue on with that conversation. Before we get going into that, we'll have time for public comment, and we do have some members of the community here with us today. So just to clarify kind of the structure of these meetings, is we have a dedicated time for public comment coming up here at the beginning of the meeting, and so if there are things you want to say or comment on or bring up, that would be a great time to do that. And we'll also, and then after that, we do try to keep the conversation within the advisory group members. But for those of you who are here today, and also members of the group as well, we'll plan to stick around after the meeting, and if there's anything that comes up that you have questions about or want to follow up on or clarify, we're here to do that. So just want to make that note. So we will move on to the public comment. And is there anyone who'd like to, from the general public that's here today, that wants to say anything? Yeah.
I'm just curious.
And if you could just introduce yourself.
Yeah, Jim Sayer, and I'm a citizen member, and not of the CAG, but I'm just curious, do you identify yourselves at the start of the meeting?
We will, yeah.
Okay.
We'll get to that after.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Sure. Hello, I'm Gregory. I'm excited to be here, excited to learn a little bit more about the wonderful things that are happening here in Missoula, and really passionate as to how we can build a better community and how can we set the stage for generations to come. And I think it's exciting to know that there's a lot of hard work being put in to figure out how we can make this a better place for everyone.
Gregory, do you mind sharing your last name just for the public record?
Gregory Daggett.
Thank you. Anyone else online? Well, we will close the public comment period and move on to the next thing. And that's a great reminder. So thank you, Jim. That let's take a moment before we kind of move on, just to introduce ourselves and who we are and our kind of organizations or who we're here representing. And we can include staff and the consultant team in that as well. So I'll start and we can go around the room and then we can move to people online. So my name is Ben Brewer. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a planning supervisor with the CPDI department for the city.
I'm Ashley, she, her pronouns. I do community engagement for the city CPDI.
I'm Amy McQuilkin, she, her pronouns. I have a few businesses downtown, Betty's Divine,
Jim Sayer.
I'm Kat Connolly. I'm the director of our on-campus lease and Meet program at the University of Montana, and I use they and she pronouns.
I'm Emily Gluckin, we use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior planner on the long range planning team.
Brittany Palmer, executive director of North Missoula Community Development Corporation, she, her.
Bob Giordano, executive director, Missoula Institute for Sustainable Transportation. That includes the Free Cycles bike program, he, him, and I'm on this advisory committee.
Erin, I'm the director of community planning and development, where this initiative lives.
Thanks, and we'll jump online here, and I'll just kind of run down the list, and if you could introduce yourselves, that'd be great. Jamin, do you mind going?
Sure, yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Jamin Kimmel. I'm a partner with Cascadia Partners. We are one of the three main consultant team or consultant firms on this team. And we're based out of Portland, Oregon, and our role in the project is focused on some of the kind of economic analysis and mapping analysis to help kind of inform the project, and also helping guide discussions about housing policy and housing affordability as it relates to the code and the growth policy.
Thanks, Jamin. Heather, we're just introducing ourselves here. going around, if you could do that.
Great. My name's Heather McMahon. I'm the Project Development Director at Homeward. And just interested in following along as we are planning our community's growth. Thanks.
Thank you. Justin?
Hi, Justin Metcalf, and I'm a local developer with Witch Camper and Evergreen Partners.
Thank you. Laval?
Hi, I'm Lavelle Means. I manage the community planning section and just engaged in this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie?
Right as I'm in the middle of coughing. Leslie Calapisa, she, her pronouns, retired community banker from First Interstate Bank.
Thank you. Megan?
Hi, I'm Megan Robson. I'm here on behalf of the Missoula Organization of Realtors. I work for Afari Real Estate, and she, her pronouns.
Great, thank you. Peter?
I think Peter is having technical issues, so he was restarting his computer. I don't think he's back yet.
Okay, we'll circle back. And you'll have plenty of chance to meet and hear from him as the meeting goes along too. Sam, you want to go?
Sure. Sam Sooner, I'm owner of Meta Urban Design. I am the project manager on this on the consultant team, and I'm one of 3 partners that Jamin mentioned on this project. My focus is on the form aspect of the code and the growth policy.
Great, thanks, Sam. And Thomas?
Hi, everyone. Thomas McClure here. I'm with All Nations Health Center in Missoula, and I use he, him pronouns.
Great, thanks, Thomas. I think that's everyone on the call here in the group and on the project team. So I'm going to pass it over to Sam, and we're going to transition on.
Great, and I think, Peter, are you there? Did you just join? Maybe he's still getting connected. So Jamin's going to start for our team, and then when Peter has his technical issues worked through, he'll introduce himself too. So Jamin, want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah, I think we wanted to just start this meeting with just kind of a quick recap of what we discussed last week, and give you all an opportunity to, if you've had more thoughts or questions that have come up in the last week as you've thought more about this work and reviewed some of the analysis we've done, give you another chance to ask questions or share your thoughts. So there's kind of two major topics we talked about last week. So in terms of a kind of high level recap of what we covered. So we talked about some elements of the equity and land use report. Primarily those 2 elements were focused on this question of what kind of mapping and analysis should the city use and information to help guide decisions about where should the code and the growth policy encourage more housing development in order to better meet the city's equity goals. And so the equity and land use report puts forth a couple of different mapping tools that we can use to think about that question and to think about where should we focus new development that would better improve things like access to opportunity, and particularly for lower income residents in Missoula. So we talked about the two different kind of ways to think about that and to map that. There was a suitability index, and we talked about some of the features that are incorporated into that mapping, which really focuses on things like access to parks and schools and to trails and to transit, commercial areas, and mapping different areas of Missoula in terms of how rich they are in their access to those amenities that make for a kind of good quality of life and access to meeting your daily needs, and particularly without needing to drive a car everywhere. So that's the suitability index, and we talked a little bit about the educational and economic opportunity index, which is more about this question of based on the economic outcomes and even educational outcomes that vary in different neighborhoods in Missoula, should places that have better outcomes in terms of economic status and educational achievement, should they be prioritized for allowing more housing? And so that's a question of, do we want to make sure that where we are allowing housing are places where particularly children who grow up in that area would be more likely to have good long-term economic prospects? So those are two different ways of thinking about equity related to zoning and land use. And then we also talked about this mapping we did of areas in Missoula where there are more populations that are vulnerable to residential displacement, and that the neighborhood as a whole could be vulnerable to a process of gentrification occurring over time. And that is higher income residents moving in and potentially displacing some lower income residents in that neighborhood, and leading to an overall demographic change in that neighborhood, which makes it harder for people to stay in the neighborhood they may prefer to live in, or where their social connections are, and things like that. And so that related to the code, because we talked about, can there be, can we incorporate that into our thinking about where we encourage housing development, in the sense that we may want to, what the research says is that we should really focus on encouraging housing development broadly throughout the city, and make sure that we don't concentrate housing development only in those neighborhoods. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Great, and then we moved into a discussion more about, okay, so if we know that we have some ideas about where it may make more sense or less sense to open up more opportunities for housing, then what actually do we need to do in the code to try to remove barriers to housing development? And so we brought up this concept of thinking about all the different code regulations, and that they're barriers, but they're also could be thought about as levers. So we have different levers we can pull, and it's important to understand how far do we need to pull different kinds of levers to achieve the housing affordability, density, housing supply outcomes that we're hoping to see. And there's different levers you can pull, and it depends on what the priorities of the city are, and in terms of which levers you pull and how far you pull them. And so we showed you an example of a series of tests we did on one of the multifamily zones, where we started with just changing one of the standards, and then we tested then adding in changing multiple standards in the code, pulling those different levers. And we saw that you can get to that having an impact on the relative affordability of units in a housing development, based on the efficiencies you can get from higher density and lowering the cost of development by modifying some of these code changes. So there's a positive story there. And then we also posited that those changes may not all be positive, and we need to think a little bit more broadly about all the city's policy goals, and about where those code changes play out on the map to really evaluate their overall impact on the city's policy goals. And we talked about there's probably a positive impact on overall housing supply from this kind of change, but it doesn't really move the needle much in terms of new units that be affordable to low income or very low income households, and that there could be potential negative impacts on equity and that are related to concentrating new housing development in places where the neighborhood might be vulnerable to gentrification. And so just trying to make that connection between, we have these levers in the code, we can pull those, but we also need to think about how that plays out in different neighborhoods that have different issues across the city. So I think we were going to pause there to see, with that kind of refresher, is there other questions or comments that you want to bring up before we move on to kind of new content?
Something you said, I wrote down 2 quotes when you talked about housing supply, where we might put housing. One thing you said is without having to drive a car. The other thing you said is good long-term economic aspects. It just made me think, do we have some goals and some givens that we're starting from? And is it the past growth policy? Are these things that we're just taking as universal goods, not having to drive a car and have long-term economic aspects? Maybe we don't have to talk too much about it now. It could be a whole long discussion, but it just made me think about what are the goals that we're striving for? Is it the past growth policy? And I would assume yes, but we could change some of those goals if we, as a group, thought very necessary.
I'd love to add to that list if we're talking about goals that may or may not be on the table already. I know when we talk about infrastructure, often we're talking about schools, transportation, street lighting, maybe. If we're not, we should be. I also do a lot of work with food deserts, access to grocery stores, walkable grocery stores, more importantly. Living currently in a food desert myself, it really impacts everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do think the conversation about the levers, we're having the conversation, we're starting to have the conversation about the levers now, but as you guys might remember, we have these kind of 2 parallel tracks to this project, and one is the code work and one is the growth policy update. And the growth policy update is exactly that place where we reevaluate what are the goals that we're operating, what's the policy guidance that we're operating under today, and that is the currently adopted growth policy. But where does that need adjusted or amended to either shift goals or identify new goals? And that's kind of that growth policy process that that is early steps of being underway. And that growth policy process has to inform our final code recommendations, because we might see some shifts in some of those values, and that should change the way we think about the tools, the code, the tools to achieve that. So we do have a place for that conversation, and that process will be starting soon too.
I would add to that a little bit too, that yeah, we have a foundation of goals, and existing policy. We have a lot of existing policies that a lot of which we've created or adopted, relatively recently. It's pretty up to date. I think that there's an opportunity here as part of the growth policy work that Aaron was talking about to clarify how those fit together and how they complement or are coordinated with one another. And that's something that we can be looking to do and to get out of that work that'll then inform the how it's implemented. I do think one of the things that we identified early on in the project was that's less clear in our existing policy is the considerations of equity. So there are some new elements that need to be brought into that as well.
We do, you're right, we do have strong direction and some kind of adjacent documents that have recently been adopted, whether that is the plethora of initiatives and resolutions and guidance that have been adopted through our climate work or through the housing policy or other kind of guidance shape some of that work too.
And so for something like addressing food deserts or lack of access to services and that type of infrastructure. That is something that's identified in our current policy. So it is something that we address, but it's, I think part of the struggle that we've seen with our growth policy now and how that's acted on or implemented is that it's the breadth of it is wide. There's a lot of goals that are captured in that, and it's not always clear how those are relate to one another, or how to talk through some of these trade-off conversations, which I think this levers approach is helping us to think about and set up.
Or zoning on the ground doesn't facilitate those goals of actually having services where we want them. There's that disconnect.
Yeah.
There's a question on the. I lost my mouse here.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. Heather, do you want to?
Oh, I was just going to add, I was part of the growth plan conversations as well. And I don't think we can do what we're doing in a vacuum. And if we do, then we're doing a disservice. I think food security, having homes, and our transportation, all of it is, from a master planning standpoint, zoning can only do so much. But if you're not considering those other factors, it'd be a disservice. And I want to acknowledge that, because I think our choices, we can only do so much with the zoning piece, but we always have to be considering those things. And I work for Homeward, and I deal with the capital A affordable, but all housing matters to me. So, because it affects us as a community. So in that same, I'm not going to stay in my narrow window. I'm going to think about the whole. We need to do that same thing with all of our infrastructure as well when we're making some of these decisions or having these conversations. So thank you for bringing it up. It's a good thing to point out.
Are there any other questions?
Just a quick comment for Jamin. We talk about these as levers. I've done a little soundboard work for concerts. I keep looking at these as sliders and faders.
Mhm.
And what a cool tool is if you could just slide them up and down, and that would
I was
automatically.
thinking that too, Bob.
Yeah, okay.
It would be cool.
Someone needs to invent that. Maybe Sam, that's your next product. Maybe it's already out there. And then you, of course, want to make sure you have the right mix of sliders, faders, levers. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a helpful
when
concept for
when
us.
we were working in Austin, that's exactly what we did, because Austin is such a big music town. So we used a mixing board, and it resonated. People understood that really, really well. Yeah.
I have like a nagging question or curiosity around the suitability and like anti-gentrification portion. Just around like isn't all parts of the inner part of the city well suited for more housing developments, but like if it's paired with tenant protections to prevent like displacement when there's inevitable redevelopment. Like I'm curious about like the theory behind taking this approach to like the color mapping.
Yeah, if I can, I think you're referring to the gentrification risk areas and how that should be informing the approach to the code update, and how much new housing is enabled by code changes. That's what you're asking about, I think.
Well, I guess it makes me like, I have a curiosity around like assigning different suitabilities to different parts of the city when it feels like all parts of the city are suitable for like more dense housing.
Yeah.
But I don't know like the theory behind why doing, I'm just curious about it.
Yeah, I was wondering if it might be helpful to run through kind of what the model is for suitability. I could spend a minute doing that if that would be helpful. But I think it's an important distinction to make with that analysis, that we call it suitability. We're trying to find a term for it, but it's not an all-encompassing evaluation. It is kind of focused on almost, I think, a way to think about it is as a walkability index. And a lot of the features in having the components that make up a walkable place, somewhere where within a reasonable amount of time, 10 or 15 minutes, you can get to a bus, or you can get to a grocery store, or you can get to a shop or something like that. There are certainly there's a lot to be said for that as being generally suitable, but it is, there are things that it's not taking into account, and so I think that's just kind of the caveat there, is to think, that this is a guide for us to look at where are things already set up, where are the amenities, where is the infrastructure, where are the services that, yeah, that's up and running. Why? And then that begs the question of, well, if that's a pretty suitable, walkable place, and we're designating it as being kind of a more spread out, less, and it's not kind of set up to grow in a compact and manner, then that's something we should be thinking about as we look at kind of the changes we could make through the process here.
I think there is, at a base level, where is it suitable to build more homes, right? And then there's the question of, and what does that mean for the people that already live there, right? And I think that's a question we have to be able to answer. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, can we design into the code, like bringing back some of those neighborhood grocery and like neighborhood commercial spaces, like making those easier to develop? Because I guess like, and I feel like Brian brought this up in a couple of meetings ago, just like there used to be other neighborhood commercial that doesn't exist anymore. And so like, how do you like not just design to build more housing or more intense housing around what already exists, but like thinking, like being forward thinking about rebuilding some of those nodes, I guess. Yeah. Seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Brittany. There's a question in the chat here, and then I think we should probably move on to the next item. The question is from Megan: Will there be a further overlay of areas that are likely to get redeveloped or are currently less dense and could accommodate greater density? And I'll start, and feel free to jump in, and anyone. But I think this came up in our last meeting as well. Can these kind of analyses be overlaid with one another? And I think that's another way to think about this, and an important kind of caveat, or just how to place these individual analyses in relation to one another, is that yes, we need to think about how these kind of stack up together. So we're seeing some indications about some things that are coming out of the suitability analysis, but there's something else that we're seeing from the equity, the land use equity analysis, and they don't necessarily say the same thing or point to the same thing. So we need to identify that and figure out kind of how they, what that tells us and how we proceed. And so I think that relates to potential redevelopment or areas of potential redevelopment as well. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Sorry for making you read. Oh, sorry, it's Megan. Sorry for making you read my question out loud, but my thought is that like, in areas like downtown, it's highly unlikely that for quite a long time, we're going to like tear down the mark and, build housing. So it's just, I'm curious to see where we actually could put these kind of things and where the property might be affordable, or at least closer to affordable, in order to do some of these developments.
And we had a great conversation about this last week, and Jamin, I don't know if it's worth speaking to that briefly again, but
Yeah.
ways that we can demonstrate this information, because we don't just want to show what the code makes possible, we also want to show what is likely to actually happen, right?
Mhm. Yeah, a useful way of thinking about that is, so these are what we're looking at so far are the initial layers of theoretically, where would it make sense to add more housing and to open up more opportunities for more housing, and where would it make less sense? And okay, that may calibrate how we approach code changes and to some degree. But then the next question, which we plan to tackle in the next phase of this work, is to answer the question, if we did change the code in that area, would that enable a market feasible development? Would it be feasible to build in that location? And so we actually are looking, I think, directly at the things that you mentioned, Megan, which are what are the land values in that area, and how does that compare to the rents or sales prices that are achievable in that area, and can you make a development pencil in that location based on that that basic market reality that every housing developer has to face. And that would give us another indicator of, okay, well, maybe, for example, there are places where it'd be highly suitable to have new housing, but the code changes that we're envisioning won't enable a form of new housing development that is actually market feasible because of the higher cost of land in the area, or whatever it may be. And so that overlay of market feasibility is something that we'll also be incorporating when we actually are kind of testing different kinds of code changes, kind of citywide across multiple zones.
All right, these are great questions, and so thank you. It's a good conversation. Sam and Peter, I think we're gonna stay on track here. I'm gonna pass it to you to move on to the next, to the new business for the meeting here.
Sounds good. And Peter, do you want to introduce yourself as you kick this off? Oh, you're muted, Peter.
Sorry about that. I'm glad I finally got in. I'm Peter Park, part of this team, and serving as principal in charge.
Is there any way we could make that bigger?
Yeah. Go to view.
Hang on one second here, Peter.
To view, and then you focus on content. It only makes it marginally bigger, but.
I'll just a little bit. All right, thanks, Peter. Take it away.
Okay, so we want to talk about the code diagnostic and continue to share a little preview of some of our findings. And but just as a reminder, we wanted to describe for you just an overview of what goes into this code diagnostic, what the process is. So it does involve reviewing a lot of existing code and policies. And you can see the list there. So it isn't just the zoning, just to remind everyone. It is an analysis of a lot of data, both current and historical, and certainly the work that Jamin has been talking about is based on that. We're also looking at the existing built conditions of the city. Concerns about how new development fits in with the community is something that we've heard. And so part of that is to understand what the variation of those different build patterns are, depending on, as you all might remember, some of our early analysis of the era in which things were built. We've been talking to a lot of frequent code users, both from public sector and private sector. And the staff have done a tremendous inventory and analysis of common code issues that, consider the known issues that the staff have across multiple departments and multiple codes. The prototype testing that Jamin has already given you a little bit of a flavor of is more extensive, and then result in the overall evaluation and findings. And so that's kind of an overview of what the work is comprised of. And today we want to just continue with this code diagnostic preview, is sort of the overview. And just as a reminder, right, the diagnostic is looking at those substantive issues, the procedural aspects of the code, and the process of how do you get to yes, and the overall organization and user friendliness of the code. So we're going to continue this conversation today. First, talking about some of those substantive aspects of the code. So last week and today, we talked about code barriers to housing production, right? We got to parking, and we got into discussion of the levers. And that was describing, those aspects of the code at a site level, given a sort of an assumed development program, what those barriers are in the code as it relates to the development of a site. Today, we want to build upon some of the concepts that we've talked about in the past of place types to demonstrate how the zone standards are out of alignment with the existing form and character of some of those building blocks of places, and point out how the code not only has an impact on the ability to produce housing, but it also is the limitations of the code in producing built form and buildings that fit with existing places.
So to piggyback off what Peter was saying, we're looking today primarily at the R5.4 district. That is the most prevalent residential zone district in Missoula, so it makes sense for us to do a deep dive into that zone district specifically. And it comprises approximately 7.5% of the entire city. It's mapped in a lot of different neighborhoods. You can see the list right here, and you can also see the area in this like orangey yellow color here on the map. Just to orient everybody in terms of the zoning standards, the minimum parcel size in the zone district is 5,400 square feet. The zoning requires front and rear setbacks of 20 feet, side interior setbacks of 7.5 feet, and then 10 feet from the side street. The height maximum is 35 or 30 or 35 feet, depending on the roof pitch, how sharp it is. And there is some nuance in the University District neighborhood character overlay that provides additional height sculpting standards. So in this summer, I believe in July, we talked through existing place types with you all. And we wanted to point out that in the areas mapped R5.4, there's different character in those two areas. So those are different, what we have been calling existing place types. You can see what that looks like here. So in the University District, again, that's what we call the urban residential place type. It has the rectilinear, pretty regular street grid, has smaller blocks, smaller lots. A lot of the area has these boulevard sidewalks. Some have sidewalks where it's right next to the curb, so you don't have those large tree lawns. But generally speaking, in this urban residential area, you see this, what we call a walkable compact grid pattern. In the areas to the south, here we're showing a snippet of Fairview's Patsy Canyon neighborhood. The character is different. So it's a completely different place type from our existing conditions and built form analysis. The street network is curvilinear. The roads curve and in cul-de-sacs. The lots typically are larger. They're primarily irregular in shape. They're not as square or rectilinear as we see in the urban residential areas. It's primarily, if not exclusively, seen with these driveways facing the street, whereas in the urban residential areas, a lot of houses are accessed from alleys. And there are still a few driveways on those blocks as well, but more or less we still get this continuous sidewalk in these urban residential areas. Let's see, in the suburban residential, we get these larger setbacks as well, and often wider homes. So we think that's important to note from a form and character perspective, that these two areas look and feel and function differently, yet they're the same zone district. So diving a bit deeper into the form and character, we're looking at lot sizes, and that sets the framework for how buildings are oriented on the street and on blocks. So we did this analysis to identify the non-conforming parcels in these areas, and what that means simply is a lawfully created parcel that doesn't comply with all standards. So on the map here, you can see there are parcels in red, and those are all smaller than the minimum lot size designated by zoning. So all these parcels are less than 5,400 square feet. I want to point out that some look bigger, but that just means there are multiple parcels next to each other. So visually, they're all kind of blending into each other, but these are the smaller parcels within the area. And about 12% of the R5.4 zone district is non-conforming parcels based on the smaller lot size, smaller parcel size. And you can see here, these are clustered in the older parts of the neighborhood. So as we looked through the form and unpacked why the city looks the way it does, that was primarily where the streetcar neighborhood went, or the streetcar went through these neighborhoods too. So these are some of the older neighborhoods and older homes in the city. Yet they're inconsistent currently with the zoning. I want to point out there are these blocks here east of Higgins, and this is what they look like. They're really small lots, really small, cute little homes along the street. And we think it's noteworthy to point out that this is inconsistent with the current zoning of this neighborhood. Yet it is part of the historic pattern and fabric that many people love about the city and the neighborhood.
So just to reinforce, so simply put, the current code does not really support the older, desirable today patterns, and it's hard to do a building that looks like it fits with the existing neighborhood.
Exactly, and that's something that we heard in our interviews when we talked to frequent code users, is that they couldn't build something to replace a building. If we just erased a building on a block, we couldn't rebuild it in some cases as is today, because the current code is out of alignment. So there's a problem with what we call infill development when you're trying to build within this existing neighborhood character. Another way that comes up is with setbacks. So this is along Mount Avenue. And again, the setback is 20 feet from the front yard to the front of the building. And there are homes that appear to be within that front setback distance. Historically speaking, the original code actually had a larger setback of 30 feet, but it also allowed what is called a context-sensitive setback. So within the historic code, it said if 40% or more of houses along a block were closer than that, then you can put your home within 6 feet of that context-sensitive setback. So it provided some flexibility, yet predictability within where the buildings were located. And so currently, this is one of those examples that we heard is especially frustrating for people who want to build homes that are compatible to the existing neighborhood character. Another thing that we've heard is that there's just not a lot of choices. People can't build different types of housing, especially within this zone district and within the established neighborhoods of Missoula. So this is a summary table of the current residential zone districts, and these are the allowed building types. The darker filled in circle means that building type is permitted. The line white circle is identifying where those buildings aren't permitted or they're prohibited. Then there are a few where there's this hatched line, and that means that they're permitted in cluster development. But for today, we want to focus on the R5.4. Again, this is the most prevalent zone district in Missoula, and it only allows single unit houses. So that was another thing that we've heard is a concern, and that's supported by Cascadia's equity analysis, that it's just limiting choices, it's limiting density, and that's different from the form perspective as well. But again, historically speaking, there are other types of buildings and other housing that we see in R5.4 specifically. So we wanted to point out that today there are multi-family or multi-unit dwellings within these zone districts. So here's a 3-story apartment building example that's within R5.4. Again, the historic code allowed buildings to be built up to 40 feet or 3 stories in height, and it provided additional setbacks and sculpt that mass a bit. It was supporting what we called the context-sensitive design. So we thought it was noteworthy to point out that there is flexibility within the existing built fabric, but again, this is a non-conforming building form based on current code. The city seemingly has recognized that this is a problem. They went through the creation of a form-based code for the Swiptacane area, and there's a whole suite of what we call missing middle or middle housing building types. So you could see this list here. It goes from mansion apartment, live work, live make, townhouse, duplex, courtyard, side yard, cottage, house, and villa. So there's a lot of different building types already identified, and on the menu within the city code specifically as it relates to the Swiptacane area. And so we wanted to point out that this is a trend we're seeing throughout the country of increasing a menu of options, and it's something within Missoula that you all are already exploring. However, it's limited to a smaller area, and it's what we're calling greenfield development. It's development within an area that hasn't previously been built.
So at this,
So,
Sam, do you want to just see if any questions about the code related to form?
Yeah.
Any questions or clarifications?
Just to clarify, so the non-conforming but compatible, those are all like older builds, that's not an option to build new.
Yeah, that's typically what you hear referred to as things that are grandfathered in. So non-conforming means that you built it legally at the time that you built it, and then the rules have changed over time, and so they might not still allow you to do that. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
And when that happens, I mean, that really is, if you think about it, if the zoning is an expression of community values, right? That's sort of a description of, at the time that these became non-conforming, the idea was, oh, well, in the future, we don't want homes like this anymore, right? And so they become illegal or non-conforming under the code that a property owner couldn't create that anymore. And it seems to us these are pretty desirable homes. They're in desirable neighborhoods, and that there's a policy foundation in your growth policy that speaks to the qualities of this scale and these kind of houses, but the code simply does not support them.
I'm going to go to the question online first. Quick time.
We would have to open up public comment
Okay.
for all public members then. And
Okay.
Bob, stand up too.
No, can I just, I'm sorry, Ellen has a comment that,
Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead, Ellen.
It was just a quick comment that I did want to appreciate and say my appreciation for this analysis. I know Jamin and I had a conversation with as a stakeholder a long time ago about these kinds of issues with the code, and so it's refreshing. Partly as part of this group, it's refreshing to start seeing your analysis on this sort of thing, more of the very specific analysis of what's wrong with the current code. That's really encouraging, and none of what you've said today about the setbacks and the minimum lot sizes and all of are surprising, but it's very good that to be hearing that analysis is underway. The one thing that did strike me though, and I know folks in the planning department may disagree, but please do not hold up the SWIP decane zoning as a positive example of a good zoning code. It is extremely frustrating for those of us on the end users of trying to figure out how to make it work and get those projects to fit that code and in a way that they pencil out and you can get through the process. So to the extent that you're using that document as an example of a good way of saying, here's a lot of housing types. Yes, of course, it's good to be recognizing those, but as a code that's useful to implement, it's extremely frustrating.
Thanks, Alan.
We've heard that too. Yeah.
This is some research I'll probably do on my own, but I'm very interested in, take setbacks. If there's a really good reason for, say, fire, I want to know about it. If there's something that was perhaps discriminatory or very auto-based, then I want to know about that too. That would really help me figure out what are the types of changes that make sense for the values of this community today. And I don't know if you all, the team, could send out some of your favorite primers on this, or I'll do it on my own. But I just kind of speaking out loud here.
I have a second.
That's a good call. Yeah, that's a good question.
Can I ask one really quick, simple question? What was that? It was like vertical mixed use type that no zoning allows for. It was like the only one in the table that no, what is that? Vertical mixed
district that, yeah, so vertical mixed use is a building type that we have in our code that it doesn't just allow for, but requires commercial community based on the primary floor. And in exchange for that requirement, they get a little more density and a little higher height. Is that accurate?
And there are specific like parameters that they need to meet that I can't remember off the top of my head, but like a certain floor to ceiling height and we have it in the definition, but like if you meet these requirements, then you can be like considered a vertical mixed use building. And I think there's no density cap.
No density cap.
So you can just kind of fit as many buildings.
And some different parking requirements. We've had mixed luck with it. We did have, I think many of you probably are familiar with it, that developed under the vertical mixed use building type on the corner of Mount and Russell. It's that large apartment building kind of right up against Mount and Russell. And they actually went through an onerous process to convert it back to just residential because they could not fill the commercial space. And luckily they also own the adjacent parcel. So they were able to, because you need more parking for just residential and vertical mixed use. And so they were able to meet the residential code and revert it back. And now they built apartments at that ground level. And so it's a building type we're kind of curious to watch.
Okay.
So just a reminder, for people from the public, just save your questions and if you want to stick around after the meeting.
And we can open up public comment again towards the end if the group agrees with that.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question on this?
Is there something in the chat or is it your well, it's monitoring.
Or we get lost.
No, I think the chat, this is Lavelle, the chat was Megan's question, which we covered earlier. So I haven't seen anything else in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Peter, you listed all the manuals and things related to code. There's one that seems to be missing, and I don't know if it's on why. The Public Works Design Manual. You had the Parks and Rec Design Manual, you had Title 12, Title 20. Public Works Design Manual, it's a pretty important one, I think.
I think that should be on the list.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
And just a note, John, we see your hand, and again, if we'll either we'll get to a point of having time for public comment at the end of the meeting, or we'll stick around for questions.
All right, moving on. Peter, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, so that's how the code, some of the observations of the code, the current codes are not really supportive of form and character concerns. And so the next substantive category is looking at the misalignment with the current growth policy. Now we know that we're going to be guided in the code reform by the updated growth policy. But here's some initial findings that we have about the misalignment with the current growth policy that might be useful in our conversations when we do the updated growth policy. So as we've talked about in the past, right, there are a lot of policies that are guiding this work. We're working on ways to funnel a lot of this policy into simpler format, and we'll be talking about that later in terms of the in conversations related to the growth policy update. But if we look at the future land use map and the existing code, right, there are a few things that are important, and again, we described in the equity and land use report. But one of the things that is important to recognize is that when we look at the future land use map as an expression of Missoula's aspirations for the future, and look at the existing zoning map, but also the existing zoning code, that is the zone districts that are, if you think about it, kind of like the tools for implementing a vision or implementing the growth policy. One of the observations that we made is that the implementation of the FLUM, the future land use map, Sam, you can go to the next slide, has some potential impacts on affordability, right? And so this is just one of the way, I mean, this is Cascade's analysis in terms of the potential areas that are impacted if the FLUM was implemented. Again, it's like, presuming it's using the tools that are available today. And so this is another one of those parts of the analysis that is helping us to diagnose the problem, but also maybe indicate to us what's needed in a new menu of zones that might be utilized in some of these areas that have been identified as, right, that there could be significant impacts on affordability if the FLUM were just sort of directly implemented. The other part of this that's really important to recognize is that, there's the code text, and then there's the zoning map. And changes to the text can have some unintended consequences if they're only changing the text, right? We got to always be aware of how those changes, what those changes might do when they land on the map. So the boundaries of where these zone districts, if you think of them as like a paint palette, right? The way they get painted on the map, some of them we gotta be mindful of what is the palette of zones that we need, what is the palette of colors that we need, and then where do we paint them in ways that address some of the concerns of affordability and equity. Jamin, I don't know if you have anything else to add to this one.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think mainly what we found is that there are some places where if the zoning was consistent with the plum, it would represent a little bit of an up zone, a little bit higher density allowed. But on the whole, there are other places where it potentially could represent a down zone in terms of less density allowed compared to today. And so the kind of takeaway was the growth policy map. I think it's important that we implement it, but I think it's also important that we take another look as we're implementing it to make sure that that growth policy designations are still appropriate and the right kind of change, given the growth policy was drafted in 2015 and some things have changed since that point, and policy direction might be slightly different.
Yeah, and again, just want to reinforce that it might be an adjustment to the in the FLUM in the recommendations. It might also be include better zones in order to implement that, so that not only to implement maybe some change to the future land use map, it might actually be the future land use map is okay. It's just that we have different zones that have some components to them that do a better job to mitigate some of the potential impacts that just aren't present in the current menu of zone districts that you have. I know that's really wonky, but we'll find a way to explain that in more detail too.
That's a good segue into the next, what we call bucket or lens that we're looking at your existing codes through, is just the overall organization and user friendliness. So a bulk of our work has been in the substance of the code. Again, we're looking at the zone districts, the building forms and building types, how well that's calibrated to the existing built environment. But we're also looking at just the mechanics of the code and how it's laid out on a page and how it presents information to people. We heard a lot about this, about areas that are challenging, just in terms of using the code document or the codes themselves. And that's one of the primary concerns we've heard, is there's too many sections, too many different documents. And that's part of our charge with this project, is to create a unified development code, bringing all of these documents into one system. So hopefully we can reduce and eliminate the inconsistencies and potential conflicts between the different documents. So within that, we heard and we've seen that there are inconsistencies just in terms of the title, chapter, and section structure. The overall TOC and organization is inconsistent, and that there are many sections that address the same topic. So as a new user of the code, and even someone who's pretty familiar with the code, the more sections you have to go to for one specific topic, the more difficult it is to use. And then within that, there are just conflicting definitions and terms, especially between the different documents, going from Title 20 to Title 12, and then the various design manuals. So just from a page perspective too, there's a lot, and this isn't extensive. This is just some of the primary pages. And again, part of our charge is bringing them all into one system. So hopefully it can be more user friendly. Hopefully there's less of a learning curve. So homeowners, people without so much technical experience won't have such a steep learning curve as they dive into the code. Within that, these are pages from Title 20 right now. they're pretty text heavy. I'd say most pages rely mostly, if not exclusively, on text. And again, we think, and I especially think in terms of pictures. And so that is one example of the new form-based code is illustrative. There are pictures. So aside from the challenges from a substance perspective, the format is trending in the right direction in terms of using imagery and illustrations to help communicate some of the design intent. Same thing for the county code. So the county updated the code, I believe, last year, 2022, and they are relying a lot more on illustrations and pictures as well. And simple building form tables, so you can really get a sense of what's allowed in what district in a relatively quick and easy way. Peter, did you want to take the process slide, the last lens here? I think you're muted again.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so that third category, right, of the process, the decision process, just some initial finding is that there's a lot of room for interpretations across different codes, but even within a particular department's codes. And also a lot of different definitions and standards across the multiple documents. And so what happens a lot of times, there's a relationship between the, what is in the code and, which is substantive, right? And when it's inadequate or when there's some lacking in clarity, that typically results in a process, a decision process. And a lot of times, yeah, so it just so happens that, well, we're not really sure, we're indecisive about how we want to set this standard. And so we'll apply a process to make that decision. And so that fundamentally results in kind of potentially long and a risky approval process. It just creates uncertainty in that process of getting approved. And, for most applicants, developers appreciate hearing no soon as much as they like to hear yes, right? It's really helpful in their decision process. And so if they can easily assess whether they can do something or not, or that they don't have to spend a lot of money to figure out that they can't do something, right? That's just not productive for anyone. So that's a piece of the procedural analysis that we are looking at, and particularly with a focus on small projects for small business, smaller developers, homeowners. And again, because of the way the code is constructed and because different departments have different standards, it is often unclear not only what's required, but who decides when one code says one thing and another code says something else, right? And so figuring that out, obviously the city gets to it and they figure it out. So why do we still have it in the standards, right? So that's what we have the opportunity to do, is to learn from how does the staff get to yes, and let's codify it that way, rather than continuing to promulgate these inconsistent standards and processes. Okay, so these are just initial findings in those three kind of buckets of substance, organization, and process. We talked about the code barriers to housing production last time, and today, right, we're really emphasizing how the zoning standards are out of alignment with existing form and character, in terms of, right, same zone, different context, non-conforming lot sizes and setbacks, and the limited menu of sort of the variety of building types allowed. We talked a little bit about the misalignment with the growth policy, just in terms of how the menu of zones is inadequate. We talked about some of the organization and user friendliness aspects of the overall structure of the code, the complexity and number of sections, conflicting definitions, unclear standards, and just the whole range of different codes that are involved in decisions about development. And then in terms of process, lots of room for interpretation and just how unpredictable the process can be. So just in terms of some discussion with the remaining time, I mean, do you have any clarifying questions about some of these initial findings? Is it helpful that we're organizing the analysis and kind of the substantive components, the organization, user friendliness of the code, and the process aspects of the code? And are there any other code issues that come to mind that you want to share today?
And if the group supports it, we can do Q&A with committee members for the next 5 or 10 minutes, and then we could open it back up for public comment to hear any parting thoughts or recommendations or feedback from public in attendance today as well.
It's like we've got a hand up here. Oh, that's from a community members. We'll just pull up on that for a little bit, just to see if there's any questions.
I'm curious, it was talked about that frequent code users were interviewed. I wonder if there was any work done with maybe prospective code users, folks who do have like the extra room on their parcel, would want to build an ADU or something similar. Took one look at the thousands of pages of documents without pictures and went, oh, never mind. I'd be curious to see where other people who don't spend 40 hours a week in that development space approach this, and maybe where those more specific barriers would be.
Good question. I don't know, Sam, if you guys have any thoughts on that. We can share kind of some of our anecdotal experiences.
I think if what I heard is, did we interview prospective code users? And the short answer is no, we didn't, but we understand that it is a barrier. The code itself is a barrier right now to those prospective code users. And I'd say that that's something that we really prioritize in the end product, is making sure that it's user friendly. So you don't need a degree in planning or design to be able to understand the document, and hopefully it's something beautiful to look at too, so you want to look at it and spend time with it. So that's definitely something that we will keep in mind at the forefront when we start to shift into the approach to updating the code.
And I will say too that, that's come up in prior conversations in this group, that, that's an equity consideration for the, whether the code is accessible, and is it accessible to, first time users as much, or small developers, or small, or just one time, project applicants, or small businesses, or local business, so it is a question and concern that we can.
And we do work really hard to try to meet people where they're at. So sometimes we'll have folks that will come in with, like a deck drawing on a napkin. We're like, okay, we can make this work. Let's figure it out. Or people who are new to development, we see that often with ADU development, that it is a homeowner. And we really try to meet people where they're at and walk with them through the process. And we collect great feedback that way about, what didn't work and what wasn't clear, but who we're not hearing from are the folks that you might mention, they look at something online and they're like, I'm out. It's just, coming to the office isn't even worth their time. And so I think that's a great population for us to try to capture, maybe through some other avenues.
So I'll admit I'm a code user. I haven't been interviewed yet. I'm on the cog. A lot of it comes in sustainable transportation advocacy, lane widths, number of lanes, sizes of streets, types of pavements. So consider myself in the organizations I represent really trying to push Missoula to become a green, natural, healthy city. That's the substance that brings me to this table and why I'm excited about this. I feel like the organization and the process should follow in a way, they're related, but follow that substance. I don't know if we need more conversation on it, but I'm really hoping, and I know that we were chosen to be on this committee to also outreach to our own networks of people. I'm ready to do that. I want to hold discussions at the Free Cycles event space about what do we want to see for this city. The work should not fall just on the consultants or just on the team. You all are doing amazing work and probably too much. This committee can really help you all do that, and then you all have to decide, filter out what is reasonable and balance all the interests. But I'm just kind of thinking out loud here on that substance piece, and that's that type of housing. We'd really like to see a lot of small cottages, a lot of small homes, affordable as possible. And I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that substance piece. Brittany and I, we met a few weeks ago. We expressed some frustrations, but also a lot of gratitude for this process and where we're going. We would like to see more discussion, more communication in the whole community as a whole. And it's hard because we don't think when you do it on social media, posters, and you've done some outreach events already. How do we keep moving forward and get the best outcome?
I think there's been a little bit of a general frustration with the pacing of things, and we share that as well, right? We want to get to the point where we're having the conversations, as you mentioned, Alan, it's so great to have to look at us digging into the stuff and have it to respond to. And I think we're getting really close to having all that framework built so that we now can go out and can start to have the conversation and have something to show and give the public something to respond to. And so we hear you.
I see. Yeah. That helps. That's just to say we're still in the get away into it, but we're still in the framework.
Yeah.
But I think that's spot on, Bob. Definitely an intention of the role of this CAG is for you to be able to meet with your groups and collectively decide what your priorities are, and then come back to this table, representing their voice. So definitely invite you to be able to do that with your groups at a pace that feels right.
And we would be open to being a part of that.
Yes, we will be
We
there.
can help facilitate or, attend or provide information or help you plan an actual event or whatever it is,
Might invite you.
That's true.
Let's,
None of my business.
I think this advisory committee with the 16 of us on it, it's exciting because I don't think any of us are seeing this as our group.
Yeah.
And then we're duke it out a little bit. There may be some expertise areas, but I don't know. I'm excited where we're going. Just want to keep it going. Keep going on that framework. Do you have?
No, I just, I don't know, I don't want to get too ahead, in the phases or whatever, but it would be at some point helpful to know from Ashley and the public engagement team, what are we going to be asking from the public? What is the decision-making space and that kind of stuff, just to start to get a sense of how to start guiding those conversations in a way that it's gonna feel productive when we actually do the outreach.
Totally second that, especially working with folks who this isn't their full-time job.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us touch this work one way or the other in our 40-hour week paid employment.
Yeah.
But I'm here representing young renters and students and young families who don't have the 40 hours a week to dig into this. So I think if they do come into a space respecting their time in that, I want to provide concrete questions so that they can fill the time without feeling like, I gave up an hour of my life for what?
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. And Brittany.
Do you want to shift to public comment for our last few minutes?
Just one last call. Are there any comments within the group here or questions on what we covered today?
Is there a hand raised or is that?
There's a hand raised from John and in the wings here. So if there's not, we can kind of devote, or Megan, it looks like you have a question, and then let's see what time we have after that.
It's not really a question so much as I just really appreciate the ability to kind of give feedback about this process and get some clarification as to our roles, because I think all of us would love to help. And we just need to know what is expected of us in order for us to be the most efficient members of this group possible.
Great, thanks, Megan. Sam and Peter, does that work to open up for a few minutes for public comment? Or is there anything you want to relay before you get to that? Okay, well, let's do that. I'm gonna promote John here.
Can you hear me, Ben?
Yeah, hello. John, if you could introduce yourself and go ahead and make your comment or ask a question.
Yeah, my name is John Wolverton. I'm a resident of the Franklin neighborhood. I'm also one of the members of Pro-Housing Missoula. I've been a sustainable transportation advocate for nearly 2 decades, so I'm intensely interested in the land use and how that affects our public realm. And I want to echo or reinforce what Bob said, that what the possibilities are in the public realm are very profoundly affected by the development right on its edge, which is basically the boulevards, the sidewalks, and the setbacks. So that's a really important point he made. I think that what I've seen so far is to caution about in the public presentations of this, with sort of the deeper dives into, say, RM 1.45 and 1-45 and 5.4 related to the suitability indexes. I think it conveys a message. It could convey a message to the public that all, say, the existing sort of institutional limits or retail limits or commercial limits, that they're set in stone, and we're just trying to figure out where to fit in more residential. And that's like a recipe for disaster. We don't also profoundly liberalize like small scale retail across all the neighborhoods. It's going to be really problematic with the additional density, where it's basically mean more people just gonna be hopping in their cars to go get things. That I believe that it's really important to preface those presentations with that ideas and visions about small scale retail in the neighborhoods to create a truly walkable city. So I was cautioning about that. I see a lot of the stuff referencing residential, but not much about the commercial. My other comment or critique is about the code diagnostic process. I think there's it lacks one tremendous element in a diagnostic that needs to be expressed to the public as well as our policymakers. If some of you might remember, back in 2012, Joe Minicozzi from Urban 3 came and presented to City Council, and some of you are hopefully familiar with Urban 3. And it's Joe Minicozzi, and he does these presentations based on essentially what they call productivity, but it's basically the revenue intensity of the different types of land use forms. And it's very, very important for our policymakers to understand decisions about, say, adding low density, because they don't pay for themselves. And it ends up with the core of a city, the commercial areas or the more dense areas, essentially subsidizing the less dense areas and especially when it comes to the ability to pay for long-term infrastructure upkeep, but also obviously services. So I think that's a really important point to make, so people understand that this is about the financial sustainability of a city to be able to take care of itself in the future. And it's just really important to let people know that, because that's like a bottom line feature of what I think we should be trying to do here, is get to a point where the city can take care of itself, and we're not constantly like just having to add more new housing to pay for the somewhat more recent housing that wasn't paying for itself in the first place. I'm dropping a link in the chat of the YouTube video of when Minicozzi presented to presented to City Council. It's kind of a really poor video, but if anybody hasn't seen it, check that out. And I know that Urban 3 has done a lot of really good work across the country. I know that their work is a lot more refined than even what Joe is presented here. They have a lot more really good examples, and we're in a situation financially as a city, as a lot of municipalities are, where this type of analysis is even far more important. So thank you everybody for your work. This is really promising, and let's come up with a great community vision and help move that forward.
Thanks a lot, John, for your comment. Does anyone else have? Oh, we got like a minute left here, and then Greg, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Ben. building on that, something that's important to me is resiliency in our community. And I'd like to maybe ask rhetorically, since we have limited time, how can the city organically grow and not set up these boxes and these zones and these requirements that are strict and rigid? As an alternative and potentially a solution that I've seen talked about before in whether it's other communities or in other contexts, is existing density plus one. If you're single unit, next door you can build a duplex. If you have a duplex, next door you can build a triplex. And that way the city can organically grow, and that is built into the code for future resiliency and organic growth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, did you want to go quick? Did you have anything you wanted to share?
Well, I know you're out of time, so I can have a lot.
We could take a minute, I think,
Oh.
or if you want to share after, or just want to make
No,
sure
no, no, I mean, I
that's
just
an
think that,
opportunity.
well, I appreciate all the work you're doing. Clearly, there are a lot of form-based codes out there that, you know, the city could take advantage of, and I'm sure the consultants are looking at that too. I live one block from those apartment buildings in the university neighborhood, and I love them. Because most of the existing homes in the neighborhood that were converted into multi-unit apartments for students mostly, or people with not huge incomes, are getting converted back into single family homes. But I was just texting with a friend of mine in Minneapolis, which probably has the best performance record right now for affordability and also for a variety of housing types, kind of along the lines of what you're saying. And one of the things that I think they did really effectively in several other cities too, that I haven't seen in this unless I missed it, because I went to the public forum a year ago when this got kicked off, the COVID forum. And starting simple, I think it was along the lines of what Sam said on, you know, places people love. And I have not really seen that. Like, I'm really proud that the university neighborhood is one of the most non-conforming neighborhoods in the city. And nobody knows that, you know, everybody thinks we're all stodgy and everything, but actually, given those cottage level non-conforming lots plus the apartment buildings, we're probably number one for non-conforming. And most of those places are the places people love. And so the more that we can, you know, demonstrate that and let people chime in that way versus, you know, code language, stuff like that, most people don't relate to that, right? And so, you know, basically 75% of people, they're more visual and they're just gonna respond to that stuff. So the more that we can demonstrate that, I think it's really important for your process and also for bringing people along, because most of my neighbors who raise noise in the university neighborhoods are the ones that are gonna be opposed to this stuff. I can tell you right now, I haven't gone through the ADU fight 10 years ago when we got the ordinance to allow for more liberal use of ADUs. So I think that, you know, making sure you do that, I know that the consultants talked about visualization in the code, but I'm saying right now, as you finalize and get through this next process, having more visuals and let people chime in on what they love, you'll probably see the stuff that you want. Yeah. It probably won't be the suburban stuff that's being built over Miller Creek right now, so.
Well, thanks for that. We're out of time. Sam, Peter, are there any final thoughts here you want to relay?
Well, just the last comment on visuals, that's something, when we see you next time, hopefully we'll be able to get into some more things that relate to that concern of visuals as a way of teeing up some of the conversations on the growth policy update, as well as the code update. So look forward to seeing you.
Absolutely. And so just for this group, we are wanting to schedule our next meeting for Wednesday, November 29th in the morning. So we'll be following up on that with the invite and the details, but just wanting to put that out there so you can kind of have it on your radar. And if there's any questions or issues with that, please follow up.
And we'll have our consultants in town, right? So
Yeah.
they'll be here in person for that meeting. And hopefully our new mayor will be sworn in and in office a matter of single digit days. Will also be at that meeting. And so it'll be a great opportunity for us to kind of regroup and.
And then after that, are we getting back on like a regular schedule? That would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
Would that be, yeah, I mean, that's good to hear, and we'll be thinking about that and communicating out about that as well, but that's
Cool.
good.
Yeah, having a good 3 weeks of notice is helpful.
Okay.
Students can place themselves on my calendar for case management, so if I don't have a block in there, I don't have much control.
Well, thank you for going along and being flexible with this schedule in the last few months, and we hear you on that, so we'll try to get it more regularly scheduled. Thanks for your time, and
Repeat the next meeting date, time, and place, please. It's hard to hear the people in the conference room sometimes.
We don't have the exact time and place that, John, but we'll get that and it'll be, and we'll send that out and it'll be posted soon. But it will be the 29th.
it's the Wednesday, the 29th is the date, sure on the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.